When I'm in Australia, I wake up with Milo. Hot Milo in the morning. This is my third week. I'm rolling up on my third week in Australia. And I arrived like on the 21st of October and spent about a week in Melbourne, and I went up in the hills. It was fun. We camped out for a couple days. I was expecting to see a kookaburra. I was expecting to be killed or injured by a drop bear. Or run over by a hoop snake. And I expected to see the Southern Cross. None of that has happened. I'm beginning to think you don't even have kangaroos here. So it's all just a myth. When dealing with hermetics and the subject of magic and hermetics, it's kind of frustrating because there is no start. There is no starting place. There is no hermetics or magic or tarot or Kabbalah 1A. That's what we call the beginning class in the US. And it always seems like you're jumping in the middle of something. It always seems like you're starting a study for which you are unprepared. That all the books and literature refer you to other books and literature that you don't own and haven't read. And well, perhaps it's not this way for you, but certainly for me, there is no start. It seems like you're jumping into the deep end of a swimming pool and you haven't learned to swim. And it just, you seem kind of hopelessly lost. And you don't know how much you've absorbed and how much you already have learned until somebody else who knows just a little less than you asks you a question and you start to explain it. And then you find out what you know. And that's kind of been the story of my writing career. I started this study in the 60s as a hippie, as a Eastern mysticism kind of hippie, and I was into meditation because I heard it was cheaper than marijuana, and better in the long run than psychedelics. But I really didn't think about writing or sharing what I knew until I was 40 years old and had been into this for a long time. And I was lucky enough to become associated with Christopher Hyatt. Anybody know the works of Christopher Hyatt? He was one of my lodge members in my lodge of OTO, and one day he just called up and said, "I'm writing a book on Taro," and sort of psychological book on Taro, and that he didn't know that much about Taro at the time, and would I co-write it with him? And that's how I broke the hymen of the writing industry. And we had such a good time writing that book. It's, well, we wanted to call it The Ultimate Divination, but then it was called The Way of the Secret Lover, or Taro, Tantra, and the Taro. To tell you the truth, I forget what the current title is now. But it was a wonderful opportunity to learn the craft from a real pro, and it gave me the opportunity to, for 2 years, to write or co-write for 4 titles. Well, the reason I knew a little bit about the Taro is kind of a story in itself. When I quit the music industry, I was a professional musician for 14 years, from the time I was 14 to the time I was 28. And probably the worst part of that was that I was actually, relatively speaking, a successful musician. And I didn't have a day job, didn't need a day job. Up until the time I graduated from high school, I helped support my family with music. When I moved back from Nebraska to California, just in short order, I got a recording career and studio work. And I was, the reason I say that it was a disadvantage, because in the late 60s and early 70s, success in the music industry more or less meant success in the excess industry. And the lifestyle of a musician in Southern California was pretty fast. And it was a lot of fun. I loved it. I left the music business just more or less for my health and for my desire to maintain a nice, stable family life. I was married and we had a baby, and I said, you know, I like the idea of being a father and a husband and coming home like Ozzie Nelson every day and being and the music industry was getting pretty wild for my health, if you know what I mean. And so, in order to replace that, I sort of went back to my old hippie roots as a seeker of spiritual things. I was a child of the 60s, and of course experimented with the psychedelics of the 60s and Eastern mysticism of the 60s. And I really liked it. I liked yoga. I liked Hinduism. I liked Tibetan Buddhism. And I sort of pictured myself as being as turning myself into a holy man. And I could picture myself with a shaved head and sitting under a tree by a babbling brook someplace and completely gaining enlightenment, hitting nirvana, losing my ego. And I pictured myself looking so cool, losing my ego. And in a way, something like that was like a disconnect for me. It was like, yeah, I would like all that stuff. I want to do that. I like expanding my consciousness. I like all of this Hindu-y stuff. I like this Zen stuff. I like the idea of stripping away one thing that I am not after another thing that I am not, until I finally hit this smooth point that people mislabel as nothingness, the big nothingness of Buddhism. And I like that whole idea, but still, I had this thing in the back of my head: how cool you're going to look being an enlightened guy, And so I figured, I'm a Westerner and I'm hardwired in a Western way. And it just seems like I was trying to play Eastern software on my Western hardware. And I started looking around for some other kind of spiritual outlet that gave me the same thing that I was shooting for in Eastern mysticism, but with a Western tinge to it, a Western way, Western hardware. And for a long time, I was really coming up empty. And I kind of looked into Christian mysticism, but I had a kind of a problem. I had a lot of negative baggage coming from the Christian world, because I was raised sort of traumatically. I was traumatized by Bible abuse, I guess we could call it. There's a lot of, I'm sure probably here too, there's people that kind of abuse the Bible to such an extent that they will whip you into mental illness. And my father had been a Mason, a Freemason, and he had this wonderful book by Albert Pike called Morals and Dogma. Has anybody seen it? It's a big, thick book, and it talks about neat stuff. It talks about the Eleusinian mysteries, and it talks about the different cults of antiquities, and the Greeks and the Romans, and it seems so mysterious. And I'd ask my dad when I was a kid, what's the Masons being about? Oh, well, what's the Masons about? Can't tell you, son. It's secret. And I said, secret? Well, you can tell me, I'm your son. Nope. You're going to have to grow up and be a Mason yourself, otherwise we can't talk about it. I said, well, can't you tell Mom? He said, nope, can't tell your mother. And I liked that idea. Wow, Dad keeps stuff from Mom. And I didn't know it, but Mom didn't like that idea, and she tried to divorce my father just when I was a young child. It's another story. My brother tells me she went to an attorney. He's keeping secrets from me. Well, does he have another woman? No, don't think so. You know, does he drink or beat you? No, but he keeps secrets from me. And, well, what kind of secrets? He's joined the Masons. He goes off once a week and doesn't tell anybody. Well, tell me what he does or anything. And my brother tells the story like this. The lawyer turned to her and said, well, I don't think you have any problem at all with Brother Duquette. But anyway, just as soon as I made the decision to get out of the music business, my older brother said, I've joined the Rosicrucian Order Amorc. And it's like mystic Freemasons, only there's women in it. And I go, ooh, mystic women. Okay. And I joined the Rosicrucian Order Amorc. Anybody, I know Amorc's big in Australia. And I really liked it. Okay, and I did more than just take the correspondence course. I took, or I became active in the local lodge in Long Beach. And I guess they just saw me coming. They said, oh, God, somebody under 50 coming in here. And I became part of the ritual team, and I found out that I enjoyed dressing up in robes and strutting around in the dark. I like that. And so I became chanter, and then I became the chaplain of the thing, and I was kind of going through the chairs. And they, once you reached the 4th degree in those days, you were allowed to take a correspondence course in Kabbalah. So as soon as I hit the 4th degree, I sent off for that correspondence course. And I was very disappointed because I got like 6 monographs, and they mostly said, run away from the Kabbalah. you know, it was sort of a thing. You know, if you're not a Jew and you're not over 40 and you haven't, you know, there was just a whole bunch of things, criteria. If you're not rich enough for the leisure time and all of that, run away from the Kabbalah. But especially run away from the Kabbalah that has anything to do with Taro. That Taro has nothing to do with Kabbalah. If you see Hebrew letters on a deck of tarot cards, run away. If you see any kind of Kabbalistic correspondences that people think they're tied up with the tarot, run away. And I was so, you don't tell me that without me saying, why? Why run away? And I talked to some other Rosicrucians and they said, well, you know, don't tell anybody, but I belong to this organization called BOTA, the Builders of the Adytum. And why don't you take their correspondence course? And I did. I signed up for BOTA. And is anybody in BOTA here? You know, I don't want to, you know, give, you know, plugs unduly, but it's a great correspondence course on Taro and Taro's relationship with Kabbalah. I unflinchingly, you know, recommend it for anybody who would want to start this wonderful study. And I took the correspondence course for about 3 years and started to have like little mystical experiences based on visions and imagery that this tarot seemed to kick on. And then one day I was at the B. Dalton Pickwick bookstore in Costa Mesa, California. And I saw, it wasn't even in the tarot, there wasn't a tarot section. We're talking 1969, 1970. But there was a box, a slipcase box, and that was displayed. And there was no writing on over this or anything else. I just saw that rose cross thing. And I recognized it because that's, well, it's kind of a very Spartan image of the Hermetic rose cross. The Hermetic rose cross is a bit more elaborate than that. It has symbols on it. And I turned the cards, the box around, and I found out that it was a deck of tarot cards. It says the Thoth Tarot. And on the side it said, you know, created by Aleister Crowley. And hello. So that's the secret of the 9th degree. Oh, come on. Not really. I was just telling a story about Israel Regardie and how much he respected me. Yeah, when these people die, I just love to see the memorials that pass through. When Regardie died, everybody said, it started off their memorial, their eulogy to it. Israel Regardie really loved me. So, but anyway, changing the subject. I found out it was a box of tarot cards. And I went, ooh, I'm into tarot. Ooh, Rosicrucians. Ooh, I'm into Rosicrucians. This is for me. So I somehow scraped up $12. Oh, $12. Today they're just, well, anyway. And I bought the cards and I took them home and I was very excited. And I opened the box up and started looking at the cards, and the cards are obviously, if you're familiar with them, just stunningly beautiful. But for me, being 26, 27 years old, to me they were disturbingly beautiful. And I had been pretty comfortable there with the Rosicrucians. with, oh, this is good stuff, this is all happy kind of sweetness and light mysticism, this is all white light kind of things, and we deal with angels and happy things and kind of self-transformational so that we get good and positive stuff and run away from demons and stuff like that. Don't get any kind of, probably anything to do with sex is probably going to get you in trouble, so we won't even talk about that. Let's just pretend that all of us are smooth down there. And these cards are disturbing. The first card that I see is the Fool card, that wild Fool card. And I'm used to a very kind of happy-looking guy. You don't know if he's a guy or a gal, but he's got a little dog with him, and he's got a rose in his hand and a little stick over his shoulder, and he's about ready to fall over a cliff, and he doesn't care, and I'm used to that kind of happy-go-lucky guy, and this Fool looks like he's insane. I mean, he's got no eyelids. What's with that? He's got horns, and he's looking really crazy. Not only that, but the Fool looks like he's jumping out at me, or am I being sucked into the card? And there's something about the artwork on all the cards as I started to go through it that seemed to oblige my brain to go someplace else than it would normally go by looking at an image on a flat card. It's like where does the horizon? Where's the horizon here? Where's the vanishing point? The cards seem to show webs, like space-time is somehow stretched and warped and distorted, and images jump out of a void that appears to be created by the ripping apart of the fabric of space. But there's things I loved. I went to the high priestess and wow, bare breasts. I'm not in Arthur Edward Waite country anymore. There's bare breasts and they're beautiful. But I was disturbed. And some of the cards, especially the small cards, were colored in such a way as to actually kind of make me sick to my stomach. It's like, why would you spend days painting something with colors like that? But they were so fascinating, they were so beautiful, and I was provoked, and I was disturbed. And I looked at the side of the box again to see whose cards are these? And it said Aleister Crowley. And I looked sort of at the promotional card on it. It had the beautiful OTO lament on it, with the diving dove and Holy Grail. I said, well, this looks so hermetic. This looks so Western tradition-y. And Aleister Crowley. Who's that? And the name sounded familiar. And I had a little occult dictionary that I bought at Ralph's, the supermarket chain in California. And I bought it at the checkout stand. It was right there at sort of at the point of sale, right there by Make Your Own Sushi and Macrame for You and occult dictionary, right? And it wasn't much more than a pamphlet, really. And I look up Aleister Crowley, and it's there. It says Aleister Crowley, famous Scottish Satanist. I go, oh my God, no wonder the cards are so beautiful. The devil painted them. And I thought, my mind went to other stories of other artists and making pacts with the devil and stuff. And Paganini supposedly played the violin so well that other violinists said no human can play the violin like that. The devil had to teach. And when Paganini hears that rumor, he starts showing up at his concerts in a big black cape, and it arrives in a hearse, and he jumps out and goes, yeah, And so I said, oh, that's it. That's why these cards are so disturbing. The devil painted him, and this Aleister Crowley Satanist character. In the description of it, it said, at his funeral, a black mass was performed. Said, oh God! And I was a wild and crazy young heretic, but I didn't want anything to do with what I perceived was Satanism. And as a matter of fact, in all fairness to people who consider themselves Satanists, I guess, the kind of Satanism that I feared was out there really was a figment of my own imagination at the time, but I didn't know that. I figured there were people, walking on water and eating blood burritos and all sorts of strange things. But I didn't want anything to do with that because, I just gotten out of 14 years in the music business. I've already been to hell. And so I tell my brother about this, and he said, I've got this book. It's called The Book of Thoth. I've never read it, but he had a little paperback Bantam edition of Book of Thoth, which is probably worth about $1,200 now, if he hadn't thrown it away. He said, why don't you give me the cards? I'm not going to look at the cards. I'm not going to read the book, but they probably go together. So I give him the deck and go, whew, I escaped, I dodged a bullet there. And then our friend Mad Bob. Almost every class, every story, every subject, I bring up Mad Bob. I hope he's real, because he's a character that pops into our lives from time to time, sometimes separated by visits of many years, but he stops in and then changes your life for the next season of your life. Does anybody have a friend like that? They're like angels. They're magical beings that pop in your life for some reason or another, and some kind of little event happens, or a trauma. You fall down, you bust your rib or something, and you're off to another magical evolutionary adventure in your life. Well, Bob's like this, and Bob shows up at the house. We hadn't seen him in 3 years, and Bob had been in Guatemala farming. And we never heard from him, but we got letters from his girlfriend that said, we're just having such a wonderful time, and Bob has found this lovely little cave, and he's growing mushrooms too, And he said, Bob is teaching us to eat mosquitoes. That's just like Bob. We call him Mad Bob for, that's a story in itself. But anyway, Bob comes, and we hug, we talk, what have you been up to? And he said, well, since I've seen you last, I've gotten into the Rosicrucian Order Amark and Mystic Freemasons, and I dress up in robes and walk around in the dark, and I'm into Taro, and I love this Taro thing. I'm starting to get into the Kabbalah and the whole Western mystery tradition. I'm kind of interested in magic, And I said, oh, and speaking of Satanism, I got this tarot deck called the book, or the Thoth Tarot. And the cards were just so beautiful and so freaky. They're magic cards, but they were designed by the Satanist. And man, I got rid of those cards right away, gave them to Mark. And so there's really scary stuff out there. Got to be careful with this mysticism stuff. And Bob looks at me like I'm the biggest idiot in the world. And I know that's what he was thinking, because he said, you're the biggest idiot in the world. And he said, everything that you think that you're interested in, this Rosicrucian stuff and this tarot stuff and this Kabbalah stuff and this magic stuff, everything you think that you're trying to get into, this guy was the master of. And if you're going to go one day further in your studies, you're going to have to come to grips with this guy. You're going to have to read his stuff. You're going to have to understand it. Because if you don't, you're missing the summit of this teaching. I said, but the book said that he was a Satanist. Was he a Satanist? And he goes, no, he wasn't a Satanist. Well, yes, he was. No, he wasn't. Well, if he was a Satanist, he was a good kind of Satanist. And that was the weirdest thing, I'd ever heard, but I'm used to hearing weird things from Mad Bob. He said, get that deck back and get Mark's book too, and read that. Just trust me on this. It's not the evil you think, but it might be scary. And so I trusted Mad Bob, and he's never let me down yet. I get the book back, I get the cards back, open up the book, and I start to read the Book of Thoth. How many of us have read the Book of Thoth? How many of us have tried to read the book? Okay, there's the... I wanted a book that said, the High Priestess, when this shows up in a reading, you're going to get lucky. Or the Wheel of Fortune, good fortune is coming your way. I was just looking for a tarot book like that. This is what I got. This is just the 7th paragraph. If I can find it here. One important interpretation of tarot is that it is a notericon of the Hebrew Torah, the law. Also, Troa, the gate. Now, by the Yetziratic attribution, see table at end, this word may be read the universe, the newborn sun, 0. This is the true magical doctrine of Thelema, 0 equals 2. Also, by Gematria, the numerical value of Troa is 671 equals 61 times 11. Now, 61 is Ein, nothing or 0, and 11 is the number of magical expansion. In this way also, therefore. Troa announces that same dogma, the only satisfactory philosophical explanation of the cosmos, its origin, mode, and object. And most of the rest of the book was just about like that. But what little scraps I could get out of it, what little things that I could understand, made me believe that Mad Bob really was correct about Crowley. And I really, really wanted to be able to understand what this guy was saying. And not only that, I wasn't sure, but it seemed like in spots, he was funny. And sometimes it seemed like, well, I think he's pulling my leg here. And I enjoyed the sense of playfulness that I got out of the guy. And I started to just like his character. And of course, I was worried, oh, this is how Satanists suck you in. They dazzle you, and then they kind of make you like them. But the Thoth Tarot got me really into all of this. There was that one promotional card that had the OTO's address, Ordo Templi Orientis, post office box in Dublin, California. I never heard of Dublin, California, didn't know where it was. But I figured there was a huge temple with golden doors, and that there were people with silk robes strutting around being masters of Kabbalah and magic. And after a while, I thought I'd like to connect with this organization. But I hadn't read any of the material of Crowley's except for this book of Thoth. And he keeps talking about this thing called the Book of the Law, and the Law of Thelema, and the new Aeon and the new age. And it sounds dangerously like he considers himself a prophet and all kinds of stuff that I don't like the sound of. It sounds weird. And a friend of mine was going to England, so I asked him, if you find any books by this Aleister Crowley character, bring them back. And he brought back a little blue pamphlet copy of the Book of the Law. I said, well, Crowley talks about this one a lot. And I thumbed through it kind of from the back forward, and there's this thing that says, the study of this book is forbidden. It's wise to destroy this copy after the first reading. And I go, whoa, that's magic. That's real magic. And I'm thinking, gee, whoso disregards this, comment does so at his own risk and peril. These are most dire. And that it seems to suggest that no one can interpret it for you. And I just love that idea. That it's a perfect idea, So I said, I think this is a magic book. If I'm going to burn it after the first reading, I'm going to set aside 3 hours, and I'm going to just read it carefully. And that's what I do. And I set up my little Rosicrucian altar. We call it a telesterion, with a couple little candles in Rosicrucian order Amorc candle holders, and on a little Rosicrucian order altar cloth, and burn some Rosicrucian order incense. And there's a mirror there, and I take a shower and get in my karate gi, which is my magical robe. And I start to read the Book of the Law, and this first chapter is just so beautiful. It seems like a holy book. It doesn't seem like Aleister Crowley's writing. It's kind of poetry and prose verse, but the first chapter is so beautiful, and don't understand what any of it means, but it's kind of erotic and beautiful. And there's this goddess, but to love me is better than all things. If under the night stars in the desert thou presently burnest mine incense before me, invoking me with a pure heart and the serpent flame therein, thou shalt come a little to lie in my bosom. For one kiss wilt thou then be willing to give all? I'm going, I'll give all. I love you. This is wonderful stuff. How could I'm not going to burn this book. That's some kind of joke. I don't understand. Then I read the second chapter, and the second chapter is perfectly nice. Okay, it's not as erotic. It didn't make me as spiritually horny as the first chapter did, but it was nice and practical, and it sort of pandered to all of my pragmatic spiritual prejudices, and that's fine. And then I read the third chapter. Let it first be understood that I'm a God of war and vengeance. I shall deal hardly with them. And I go, well, what's happening? What? This is totally different. It becomes violent. It becomes bloody. It's rude. It gets bloodier and bloodier, and there's talk of war and eating of flesh, and and being against the people, and finally whips itself up to curse them, curse them, curse them. With my hawk's head I peck at the eyes of Jesus as he hangs on the cross. Flap my wings in the face of Muhammad and blind him. And I'm going, he's the devil. He is the devil. And I got sucked into it. Mad Bob must belong to this cult, and they've just sucked me into it. And all the old doubts come back, and I say, yes, he is indeed. Now, and I finished the third chapter. I finished reading it, but I had set myself up psychically and magically for the magic of this book. And I had set myself up for a little nervous breakdown. And, I had that nervous breakdown. And by the time I was through with that last chapter, my face was red. I know it was because I was sitting there in front of my telesterian looking at my face getting freaked out. My ears felt like they were on fire. I was shaking. I was breathing abnormally. My heart was just racing. And I can't destroy this book fast enough. And I get my little incense burner thurible, and I grab a couple of bottles of isopropyl alcohol out of the medicine cabinet, and I take it out into the driveway. But before I do that, the third chapter says, paste the sheets from right to left. And then behold, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm supposed to glue the pages together, seal it up like St. John the Divine sealing up the book of Revelation. My head's just going crazy. And so I get out a bottle of Elmer's glue, and every page I glue from right to left and top to bottom. And when it's through, that little paper back pamphlet of the Book of the Law is all soaked through soggy along the edges, and it's just a big swollen soggy mess. And I go out in the driveway and I put it in the thurible and I pour the alcohol all over it and fill up the thurible with it, and I try to light the alcohol with a book of matches, and my hands are so wet with alcohol that I can't get a spark off of the match, and I'm going, I'm being prevented by, and finally when I get the spark off of that match, it sets my hands on fire, and I don't set fire to the thurible with a match. I set it on fire with the fire in my own hands. I have to go, and the whole thing is very dramatic. And then when I beat it's a very cool flame. I didn't hurt myself at all. It's a cool blue flame, isopropyl alcohol. And I finally got that out, and I got it burning, and I sit down in the driveway, and then I have another little nervous breakdown, only this is a quieter one. And the book doesn't really start to burn because it's all soggy with Elmer's glue along the edges, and it takes a while, and it has to actually burn from the exposed area inward. So the center of the cover burns first, and it takes a while. But anyway, my nervous breakdown concerns this emotional event that I just went through. And I had just come out of like a decade of political activism in kind of my effort to oppose the war in Vietnam. Okay, in high school I became radicalized, I guess is the term, and it started from my opposition to the war in Vietnam, and then just my general education on kind of world politics. And in other words, I was very, very progressive politically. And for a long time that progressive politics kind of was my religion. And it took the place of religion. And one of the worst things in my worldview that a person can do is to burn a book. That sometimes there's a reason to poke somebody in the eye. Sometimes there might even be a reason for one person to kill another person. But there's never a good reason to burn a book. Even a bad book, even an evil book. And I was committing the biggest taboo of my life, okay? And I had been tricked into doing it, in 20 minutes of reading a freaky chapter in a book. Here I was burning a book out in my own driveway, and I was not proud of myself. There was shame, and I was thinking, what on earth is in that book that would make me do that? And then it dawned on me, there's nothing in the book that made me do it. The problem's me. Okay, I've got a big problem if I could be driven to this point. And so I sort of sat and stewed in those musings while I watched one half of the book of the law slowly burn away. And I was allowed to read half of it all over again, page by page, as it burned through from the front to the back. So the first page, or the cover, the book of the law, and it had the OTO Lamon, book of the law. Then the first title page with the AA seal, that very magical looking 7-pointed star, the book of the law. And then, had the manifestation of Nuit. I couldn't read the back page, but I could. And so it was like a dramatic, satanic opening of Bonanza. And the last thing I could read, the last page that burnt, was the study of this book is forbidden. It's wise to destroy this copy after the first reading. And it truly was textbook drama. It was a rich, dramatic experience. So much so that I got it. I got it. And one of the things in that big I got it was the beauty and the drama of the spiritual art of magic. Magic is a spiritual art form that's dramatic. It has all of the highest elements of high drama, and that not everybody resonates to that. Some people are mystical people and are quiet enlightenment people, but some people, and I found out that day, including me, needs the drama of magic, needs the colorfulness of magic. This is how I deal with inner things inside me. I somehow or other have to throw them out in front of me and be part of a drama with it. So, but anyway, I wrote to the OTO, kindly communicate to me as you will. That's all I wrote. Kindly communicate to me as you will. Well, it wasn't their will to communicate to somebody that writes like that, so they didn't write back. 90 days later, and I do it all on the equinoxes and solstices so they know how hip I really am, I write them another letter. Please send me your brochures and information. Well, I didn't know, but there was no brochures and information, and they said, it's the guy who wants us to communicate to him as he will, to throw that one up. 90 days later, I write again. I suppose the first two things sounded pretty stupid. Look, I'm really sincere, and I really want to look into it. And I've had some wonderful experiences, and I don't know what it's all about, but boy, I want to find out more. And I think that the universe is more or less conspiring to make me hook up with you, and I'm probably going to keep on writing. So please, please let me know what I can do. And we move a couple of times before I get a next letter back, and so the letter has to be forwarded twice. And when it finally comes back, the letters. The response is, "We know nothing about you. We don't offer astral initiations. We kindly send back your complete resume of your life and all of your birth information, including the exact time of birth and place, and then we'll get back with you." And so I write him a nice letter and saying, "Well, I'm a musician. I'm a bum, but I was born on this date. You can look up the date, and if I'm not a mass murderer, will you please write back?" And eventually, letters come back, where they schedule my initiation. And I take a bus up to Dublin, California. It's an all-night drive up the abyss of the I-5 freeway. God-awful thing, going all night, but they don't give me their names, they don't give me their address, okay, they just say, "Tell the bus driver to let you off at such and such a corner, and go to such and such a motel and check yourself in, and we'll call you." And then, and that's just what I do. But as I'm driving or riding in the bus with this ex-convict that's sleeping next to me, I'm thinking, oh God, Constance doesn't even know where I'm going. She doesn't have a phone number. She doesn't have a name. She doesn't have an address. What if this is just one? What if they're crazy? What if they are crazy? What if Crowley was a Satanist? What if I'm going to meet some 80-year-old priapic man with goat leggings and a red-headed old bag with saggy tits, and they're going to rape and eat me, and Constance won't even know where I'm gone, and I have all these old doubts and everything else, but anyway, that's those doubts were assuaged when I got there, and I joined the OTO at that time. But the reason I'm telling you all of this is just to kind of give you a background of where I've come from, how all of this really set the stage for the entire rest of my life and the rest of my life's work, and just to show you that the Thoth Taro can work magic in somebody's life in a very significant way. And I guess I just had to tell you that story just to get that part out of the way before we move on to the cards themselves. Well, welcome back. Wow, Chance just laid an egg Benedict on me.
Is that a euphemism?
As we say in the OTO,
Get up on the table.
Well, anyway. Let's talk briefly about this image here of the Hermetic Rose Cross, because in a very real way, it's the table of contents of the tarot, and a most fitting design for the back of the Thoth Tarot. Now, just because Crowley was brilliant, just because Crowley at least considered himself the prophet of a new aeon, and just because the magical formula of various aeons change the way magic is done as human consciousness evolves. And just because it's kind of new and approved in New Age and everything else, the Thoth Taro is in and of itself not that much different in structure than the tarot of the old Aeon. Okay? The Thoth Tarot is, for the most part, an elaboration, a dilation of the arcana of just standard tarot. It's constructed with just a couple little very important tweaks. It's constructed just the way that any standard deck of tarot cards is constructed. Specifically, the images that Frida Harris worked with, especially on the small cards, were just an elaboration of the Golden Dawn, the esoteric deck that the members of the Golden Dawn were obliged to personally copy themselves. And so it's not, we're not dealing with a radical departure of how the tarot is constructed or anything else. Now, there are decks, they're like novelty decks or new divinatory decks that you can buy today in stores and off of at Amazon that aren't really tarot decks. You know, they're divinatory decks, and as such, I'm sorry, you can divine with anything. You really can. You can divine with playing cards. You can divine. Actually, when you actually know what your question is, you can divine from the next observable phenomena, no matter what that can be. I use television, TV-mancy. I call it the couch potato oracle. I just use the remote and ask a question. You know, what am I going to do with mom? I had this 94-year-old mother. The last question I asked the television was, what am I supposed to do with mom? She was failing health, and I really wanted to know which way to. And I clicked the television, put it on mute, and just flipped through the channels and closed my eyes. What do I do with mom? And then just arbitrarily take the mute off. Bring something to eat. Make funny faces. It'll embarrass the child, but that's okay. And it's so weird to actually hear your question go out and hear in real words an answer back. When you really have a question, the answer comes from everywhere. You just got to figure out how to get away from yourself, out of the regular flow of consciousness long enough to hear that answer. But even though the TV is fun, dice, you can randomly generate things out of dice or flipping a coin. I call it the Oracle of Coin. Flip a coin. It answers a yes or no question correctly 100% of the time. It's just that sometimes the universe is toggled one way to make heads mean yes, and sometimes it's toggled another way to make heads mean no. But truth reveals itself in perfection. And divinatory devices are easiest to use when the divinatory device is some kind of an expression of something that's perfect. And the Kabbalah is perfect, mathematics is perfect, and because mathematics is perfect, things Kabbalistically based are really handy for divinations. And in the West or in the Eastern realms, the I Ching, which is based on perfect mathematics, is a wonderful oracle too. The Taro is built on a very, very classic Kabbalistic mathematical perfection. And truth is revealed in perfection like that. You can get really right hemispherish and say, well, beauty is perfection. Why don't I just go surround myself with beauty to get a question? Well, don't you take a walk sometimes to walk out a question? Don't you go to the beach, or you go to a park, or go to a garden, or contemplate, a rose or a flower? It happens, okay? Tarot is perfect in its own way, or as close to perfection as possible. And this rose cross kind of tells us why, tells us how the tarot is structured. And in tomorrow's Kabbalah class, we're going to go into greater depth on that fundamental structure. It's like you really should have tomorrow's class as a good foundation to this class, and you really should have this class as a good foundation to tomorrow's class. Not that I'm trying to sell both of them, but that's how this stuff is. It always seems like you need a little something that you don't have to learn something new. But anyway, here's the Hermetic Rose Cross at the Rosicrucian Order Amorc Lodge that I belong to. They had a version of it just like this up in their social hall. And one day after Lodge, I was talking to a new member, and I was pointing out all the different landmarks on this cross, and one of the old past masters, a guy with gray hair and bushy eyebrows, and he never smiled, and he snored during meditation, but I figured he was communing with the gods nonetheless. And he hears me talking about this to this younger member, and he looks at me and he interrupts and says, "You've just beheld the earliest rays." And he said it so dramatic that I thought he was kidding. I thought he was joking, and I laughed in his face. And then I realized that it wasn't kidding, that he delivered that line for dramatic effect, and I just had laughed in his face. He says, "Come with me." And I figured he's going to just take me and kick me out in the outer darkness, and I'm going to be there forever. He takes me outside the temple, down the street to his car, where his car is parked. He pops the trunk. Out of the trunk, he pulls there's a leather briefcase. He opens up the briefcase, and out of the briefcase, he pulls like a little satin bag, a purple satin bag with a little gold braid tie on it, and he opens it up, and he pulls out a ribbon, and at the end of the ribbon is this. And it's in gold. And if you can imagine that every line is a piece of gold wire about 1/16 of an inch high, and all the colors were poured enamel. And poured in such a way as it had a curve, the meniscus. Okay, the meniscus of every one of those petals was like a rounded top thing. It was it was so gorgeous. It was beautiful, and everything was colored and poured enamel between gold wire, and the Hebrew was written on there, and everything just like you see here. Only just imagine every line is gold wire. And then it flipped around in the sunlight, and on the back it was just pure polished gold, and there was writing engraved on it, and alchemical symbols, and Latin, and you could tell that like a motto was written on it, and it was just so gorgeous. And he didn't say a word; he just held it out like that, and it gleamed in my eyes. And he says, "That's the Rosy Cross." I love my life. I love events like that. And I was very impressed. And it was about 9 months later, that guy was in my house taking Minerval. But he was the head of a little Golden Dawn group in his community. But there it is. And the reason it is so perfectly constructed, and the Taro constructed the same way, is because of the way this image grows. And I'm going to take you on a little tour of how it grows, and so you can see how perfectly the Taro is constructed. You see the little white dot right in the middle of the little tiny cross? That's where it all starts. And if we can imagine that we're zooming our camera into the little white dot and into the realm of, let's say, the pre-Big Bang singularity. And that is the point. The arrow isn't part of the thing. The arrow is for I've just learned I can do that now. I can see, point, right there, okay. In Masonry, or at least in Scottish Rite Masonry, we have this wonderful ceremony where we're kind of introduced to concepts of the Kabbalah, and then there is no follow-up whatsoever to what that may mean, but it's a wonderful lecture. And at the beginning of that lecture, or dominating the whole stage for that lecture is a white cube. And the Kabbalists tell us that singularity, that pre-existent object, and it's an object before there is a noun in the world, okay? That pre-existent, non-being whatever is a cubic stone. They call it the white cubic stone. And the reason that they call it that is, I guess it's got to start somewhere. And they have the metaphor for the building of the universe and for the building of creation for what will be being and consciousness is like the first stone in an edifice. But the stone has something going for it, okay? It takes gods, mathematic gods, even to make the cube. So if we take our microscope, see, we've taken our microscope and looked inside the little point in the middle. Now let's take our microscope inside the cube itself. In order to make the cube, that point had to think to itself, I need elbow room to create. Okay, there is no outside of myself, just like the physicists tell us the pre-Big Bang singularity, there is no space outside of it. Okay, space hasn't been created yet. It's hard for us to wrap our minds around it, but Kabbalists sat around and wrapped their minds around this stuff all day long. I think they got paid. The point needs elbow room for a manifested universe, for a manifest being. And the only way for a point to start to create that elbow room is to first extend itself. And in the classic text, the Sefer Yetzirah, from which, believe it or not, the Taro springs, that point extended infinitely upwards. Well, we call it upwards. It doesn't matter. It extended and created a dimension that we'll arbitrarily call upness. And because that extension went infinitely out, we can't discuss it. We can't wrap our minds around what that infinite extension really is. So the Kabbalists said, okay, for the sake of discussion and for the sake of thinking about it, let's say that the one reached to infinite height and it sealed infinite height. Just like me reaching up and touching the ceiling. Okay. And it sealed infinite height. And when it sealed infinite height, our minds kind of, imagine like when we touch water and the concentric rings go out, or when we touch Jello and it goes blah, 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 blah. So the point extended infinitely up and sealed infinite upness. It goes blah, 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 blah. And I tried to picture the blah, blah, blah in this with that circle there. And then from this center point, it reached down and sealed infinite depth. Blah, 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 blah. So just like the floor. So imagine the blah, blah, blahs up there and the blah, blah, blahs there. And then left and right, sealing these two walls here, blah, 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 blah. And that looks like a good start on creation, but it's still a dimensionless plane surface. And but then when it reached infinite forward and infinite backwardsness, it created space. And what created space, what created dimension, what created the environment for movement in that dimension, which in turn creates time, all of the blah blah blahs are intersecting each other at right angles, and they're forming an infinitely expanding cube. And isn't that a nice way to sort of picture Big Bang expansion, how it creates space as the plasma energy expands? But look at the characters that we've formed. Look at the gods that we formed, the mathematical gods that we formed with that process. We've got the point in the center, okay, which is kind of an inscrutable thing. So that's Mr. One. But Mr. One, Genesis would have been more accurate if it said in the beginning, God created three. Because Mr. Up, Down, Mr. Right, Left, and Mr. Forward, Backwards is the first God. Three got it all going. Okay, so there's three. Then the point through the vehicle of the three created the 6 sides of the cube. So with the point as the center landmark and the 6 sides, 7 grew out of 3. 3 grew out of 1, 7 grew out of 3, and there are 12 edges. 3, 7, and 12. Now, I know there's 8 points too. But the Chinese zoomed in on the 8, okay? But that's how those trigrams formed out of there's 8 trigrams, and the 8 trigrams make the 64 hexagrams, and everything's built on 8s. So I guess there was some kind of agreement between, everybody met up at a Chinese restaurant. And the Kabbalist says, well, you give us the 3, 7, 12, and we'll play with that. I can build you a 22 out of that, and a 10 and a 4 and stuff. Give us that. Chinese says, okay, you give us the points. We'll build perfection out of that. Okay. Stay out of my I Ching, okay? 3, 7, and 12. Gee, 3 plus, and just playing with that, 3 plus 7 is 10. 10 plus 12 is 22. Gee, what can you do with 10? 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. Gee, well, 4 must live in 10. 4 must be the master letter of 10. Oh, to 22. Oh, there's 22, all sorts of Hebrew letters and stuff. Tomorrow we'll go through it in painful detail. Okay. But can you see just in those numbers, 3, 7, and 12? And that 3, 7, and 12ness that made that cube that's inside that little tiny point is going to now echo in a lower octave to actually create the manifested universe. That cube pops open just like it does in that Masonic ceremony. And when it pops open, it forms a cube, just like that. The cube pops open just like a kernel of cosmic popcorn. Okay? And just like in that Masonic ceremony, there's a nice rose in the middle of it. That cube of 6. 6 has been traditionally the number of deity. That's why the hexagram of Solomon has always been a macrocosmic symbol. And the symbol of man, the symbol of humanity, has always traditionally been 5. Because, you know, when we stand naked in front of a mirror and go like that, we make a star. Okay, it's almost as simple as that. We're a star. Every man and every woman is a star. And when you see stars in Egyptian tombs, stars are just 5-pointed things. Just, okay, kind of cool. The 5 is nailed to the 6, crucified to the 6, not as punishment, but to show that the 5 and 6, the microcosm and the macrocosm, can never, ever, ever be parted. They are indeed one thing and not two things. And that's that little tiny cross right in the middle of the big rose cross. So if you can imagine, we've gone through the white point and we're building this rose cross from the inside out. We're not. All of this is taking place inside the white point. So when we have the big rose cross at the end of it, that's because it was all inside that. Okay? There's a couple green barbs, which I almost says, well, now that there's a beginning of who you are as a being, here's a place to put you between the coordinates that will eventually, it's almost like the "you are here" point on the map at the shopping mall. Okay, there's other things for that barb, but we won't get into it right now. Okay, the echo of Mr. Up, Down, Right, Left, and Forward, Back now starts to manifest as the rose that surrounds that little cross there. And here's where our Hebrew fonts, or our elemental fonts, didn't come out. But you have in your handout here, and I think it's time to turn to the little booklet one, the one that says Fundamentals of Hermetic Kabbalah. I'll give it back, don't worry there. And if you open it up, you'll see numbered points, like number 1 is the point, number 2 the cubic stone, number 3 the construction of the cube. Have we all found that? Okay, we're at number 7. The 3 petals of the elemental trumps. Those are the elements, the primitive elements of fire, water, and air. We'll talk about Earth in a little while. Yeah, Earth's an element, but it's a lower class of element. And as the day wears on, you'll hear me say many times that Earth is screwed. And well, but in a good way. Okay. So the echo of Mr. Up, Down, Right, Left, and Forward, Back, the echo of that three of being is now echoing through a universe that is actually starting to manifest on us. And it manifests in those first three primitive elements. And the echo of the seven now starts to manifest in the rose as that layer of rose petals where there's seven of them, and they stand for the seven planets of the ancients. Now, when we say planets, these are planetary spheres that you might want to look at them more as convenient planet names for aspects of the seven rather than the naming of celestial planets, because we know there's more than 9 or 7 planets, and here even the sun and moon are considered a planet. So don't get too carried away with the astrological concepts, but there are things martial, there are things solar, there are things mercurial, there are things Venusian. So we're talking great big concepts here. And the same thing that built 12 out of that expanding cube now is starting to manifest in the world as the 12 petals of the zodiacal trumps. And there's the zodiac cards and the signs of the zodiac. So let me go back. The elemental tarot cards are the Fool for air, the Hanged Man for water, and the Judgment card, which Crowley calls Aeon for fire. Now there is a card that does double duty, takes on Earth, because Earth may be screwed, but it's not completely out of the picture, so Earth will get some kind of representation here, don't worry. And let's go this way. And the planetary trumps are for Mercury, the Magus, or the Magician card, the Empress for Venus, the High Priestess is the Moon, the Universe card is Saturn. And because Saturn is such a good sport, because the sphere of Saturn is across the abyss and can handle all sorts of stuff, Earth is attributed to Saturn too, if you need to have an attribution. Okay, the Wheel of Fortune card is our Jupiter. The Tower card is Mars. And the Sun card is the Sun. Okay. And the Zodiac cards. Now the Zodiac cards almost appear right in the same order that they appear in astrology. There's a little tweak going on in the Thoth Tarot, and we'll get to that in a minute. But for the most part, we got the Emperor, Hierophant, Lovers, Chariot, Lust, Hermit, Adjustment or Justice, Death, Art, which is Crowley's new name for the Temperance card, the Devil, the Star, and the Moon. That respectively, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. Isn't that clean? Isn't it pretty? And there's all the colors are arranged in a very logical and anal retentive manner. Kabbalah is nothing if it ain't anal retentive. I tell you, there's the tightest ass spiritual study in the universe. Okay, then surrounding that rose, we've got the foundations of a repeat of that little cross popping open. And now we've got a big cross popping open, and because it's the the big cross of manifestation. We've got big general elements here represented. We've got wands, let's say we got red, yellow, blue, and blah, blah. So red would be for fire and wands, and yellow for air and swords, and cups for blue for cups and water, and blah, blah, blah for earth, because earth is screwed. Not only that, but it's separated from the others by an abyss of white there, and you can see that the discs, the earth thing, it's even broken up into 4 highly polluted colors, as if to say, earth doesn't really belong directly to our family here of elements. And earth doesn't get nice primary colors. It gets mixed up colors. Okay. But it will eventually manifest as a full suit of tarot cards, so don't worry. My wife hates it when I say earth is screwed all the time. She's tell him it's a special thing. I said, well, it is. It's funny, though. I like to say screwed. Okay. Then, added to the arms of the cross, the Hermetic Rose Cross has 4 pentagrams. A green one in the red side, and a purple one in the yellow side, and an orange one in the blue side, and a white one in the bottom there, the earth thing. And can you see that green is a combination of yellow and blue, and that purple is a combination of red? And see how the colors are made up? It's just so clean. Guys, people who thought this up had a lot of time on their hands. This would have never developed like this had there been television. Okay, people. And white is so, they just, for the one down below there, you couldn't even see it unless they made it white, so they just made it white. And then surrounding each of those pentagrams are symbols of the elements. Now that's just to drive the point home that these pentagrams are representative of the ace and the 4 court cards of each suit. So can you see how many tarot cards we've got there so far? Oh, I guess we've got them all. Oh, except for the 36 small cards, the 2s through 10s of the suits. But they live inside the kings, queens, and princes court cards. They actually live inside there. Now, no small cards live inside the princesses or the pages in other decks, because the princesses represent the element of earth, and earth is screwed. But anyway, can you see the entire tarot now? The entire tarot. There's those little elemental symbols there that surround and they stand for the prince, knight, queen, prince, princess. And the ace is that, spirit wheel up on top. Very handy. And there it is. That's our Hermetic Rose Cross. We've also got in that white area, just almost, in my opinion, almost as an afterthought, we have the macrocosmic hexagram that has the planetary spheres around it and the sun in the center. So it really is packed with a lot of goodies and a lot of Kabbalistic concepts. And when you look at a Hermetic Rose Cross with magical eyes, or if you're looking at it with the spirit vision, as they would say in the Golden Dawn, and envision living things are symbols, and symbols are living things, when you look at the Hermetic Rose Cross there, it is just crawling with life. It is so alive. And the 78 cards of the Taro are just one little manifestation of all of this life that is just teeming from that one complex symbol. So isn't it a perfect thing to put on the back of those cards? And you know, if it wasn't for that Hermetic Rose Cross diagram, I would have never bought the cards in the first place.